2,194 years ago, a 90-year-old man opened his mouth, bit into a piece of meat, and spat it back out. He knew they were going to kill him for that. He knew how. And still, he spat. The meat was pork. And before this video ends, you are going to understand why a single bite of pork in that exact moment of history was worth more than a man's life. Why 3,000 years later, a Muslim in London turns his face away from a plate of ham. Why a Jew in New York, who never sets foot in a synagogue, still refuses bacon without being able to explain the reason. And why you, who probably eats pork without thinking, are taking part, without realizing it, in an invisible war that began on a hill in Israel around the 12th century before Christ. What you were taught about pork is wrong. It is not about hygiene. It is not about trichinosis. It is not because the pig wallows in mud. Those are comfortable explanations that float around in Sunday school classes and textbooks, and all of them collapse under a single question. If it were trichinosis, today, with proper cooking, Jews would eat pork. They do not. If it were climate, Muslims would have given in Bosnia, in Albania, in the snow of Central Asia. They did not give in. They died before giving in. Real people with real names preferred to have their tongues ripped out rather than swallow a piece of bacon. What kind of animal does that? What lies underneath the pig, hidden in history, that could possibly explain it? I am going to tell you. And I am going to tell you, crossing 3,500 years, 3 religions, a civil war in Judea, a vision on a rooftop in Joppa, blood spilled on a desecrated altar, and a beast that split in two the identity of an entire people. By the end, you will understand why Christians can, in fact, eat pork, but not for the reason they repeat from the pulpits. The real reason is more uncomfortable. It begins with a dry verse, no decoration. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 7. God speaks to Moses, lists clean and unclean animals, and says of the pig, though it has a divided hoof and is cloven-footed, it does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You shall not eat their flesh nor touch their carcass. Read it again. You will notice something. God does not mention diseases. He does not talk about bacteria. He does not warn about parasites. He just says one word, unclean. In Hebrew, tameh, a word that appears so many times in Leviticus that most readers skip it without thinking. But tameh does not just translate as dirty. Tameh is what cannot draw near to the sanctuary, what breaks the boundary between the everyday and the presence of God. It is a ritual category, not a sanitary one. And that changes everything, because if it were about health, it would be negotiable. Cook the meat well, problem solved. But if it is ritual, no pot in the world can fix it. The boundary is somewhere else, and pay attention, the pig is not the only animal on that list. There is also the camel, the hare, and the rock badger, 4 animals named explicitly. But of those 4, only one became a flag, a frontier, a sword. Nobody died for a camel. Nobody wrote poems about the hare. The rock badger is so obscure that most people do not even know what it is. But the pig became a 3,000-year war, and there is an archaeological reason for that. And it begins in the soil. There is a site in Israel called Tel Es-Safi, a mound of earth that archaeologists identify as the ancient city of Gath. Does that ring a bell? Yes, that Gath, the hometown of a giant called Goliath. When Professor Aaron Meier's team began digging Tel Es-Safi along with Ashkelon and Ekron, they found something that rewrote the diet of the ancient Near East. In the urban Philistine layers, pig bones make up as much as 20% of the animal remains. Tons of pork, generation after generation, sacrificed, roasted, shared in every Philistine home along the coast. Now cross the hill to the east, climb up to the highlands, to a site called Khirbet Qeiyafa, a fortress dated to the 11th century before Christ, looking down on the valley of Elah, the very valley where the boy David faced the giant. What do archaeologists find? They dig up thousands of bones, goat, sheep, cow, and of pig 0, not 1. The same border in the same landscape split in 2 by a table. That is not a coincidence. That is identity. And now comes the detail that almost no one tells. A team led by the geneticist Mirav Miri, together with Mayer and Finkelstein, analyzed the ancient DNA of those Philistine pig bones. What they found shook archaeology. Those pigs were not local. They had European lineage from the Aegean. The Philistines, when they landed on the coast of Canaan around the year 1175 before Christ from what is today Greece and Anatolia, brought their pigs with them, alive, on the ships, like immigrants carrying the flavors of home. The pig was their cultural baggage, their childhood food, their altar, and on the other side of the hill lived the descendants of Abraham, without a single pig bone in their trash heaps. Are you starting to see it? The prohibition was not born in a vacuum. It was born on a frontier. It was born in a silent culture war. It was born because on the other side of the valley, a foreign people ate pork at their tables and at their shrines. And God told his people, "You will be different. Your table will be different, and by your table everyone will know you belong to me. But stay right here, because what is coming breaks the head open, because there is a question almost no one asks. If the prohibition was given in Leviticus in the time of Moses, why did it take so long to become the great symbol of Judaism? For 700, 800 years, the pig was one of several food prohibitions, important but not central. The Hebrews did not eat pork, but they did not write poems about it either. Until a man came along, a man with a long name and an ego with no measure, Antiochus IV, nicknamed by himself Epiphanes, which in Greek means the manifest God. An arrogance so vast that his own contemporaries nicknamed him in mockery Epimanes, the madman. The historian Polybius recorded that nickname, and it stuck. We are around the year 167 before Christ. Antiochus rules the Seleucid Empire. Heir to a piece of Alexander's empire, he has a project that in his brilliant and sick mind is going to unify his world forever. Hellenize everything, one culture, one language, one religion, the Greek one, but there is one people that will not yield. Small, stubborn, in a province called Judea, a people who refuses to bow before Zeus, who circumcises its sons, who rests on an absurd day called Sabbath, and who does not eat pork. Antiochus decides to break them, and he chooses, with surgical precision, the pig as his instrument. Picture the scene: Macedonian soldiers in formation, drums, torches, and a procession that climbs step by step up to the altar of the Temple of Yahweh, the holiest place in Judaism, where for centuries only lambs, bulls, and doves had been offered in ritual purity. Antiochus orders an image of Olympian Zeus to be brought in. He plants it on the stone of the altar, and then on that same stone, he does something no king before him had ever dared. He sacrifices a pig. It is the 15th of Kislev in the year 167 before Christ. The date will be carved into the first book of Maccabees as the abomination of desolation. The blood of the animal spills onto the altar. The smoke of the pig's fat rises up to a sky that for 1,000 years had only received the aroma of kosher sacrifices. Priests, forced at sword point to witness it, vomit, weep, drop dead right there. Antiochus does not stop. He orders the scrolls of the Torah burned in the public squares. He orders pork brought to Jewish homes and forces, under threat of death, the families to taste it. If you refuse, they execute you. If you chew and swallow, you live. It is at that exact historical moment when the pig stops being one of several prohibitions and becomes the center of the Jewish religious cosmos. Because, in front of Antiochus, eating pork stopped being a dietary transgression. It became a betrayal, A flag lowered, a surrender, and here comes Eleazar. Eleazar was 90 years old. He was one of the leading scribes of Jerusalem, a teacher of the law. The second book of Maccabees, chapter 6, describes him as a man of dignified appearance and a flawless life from childhood. They dragged him to the place of the illegal sacrifice. They forced his mouth open. They shoved pork between his teeth. And instead of swallowing, he spat the meat out. His own friends, the officials in charge, who had known him for years, took him aside privately. They whispered in his ear, "Bring your own kosher meat from your house, old man. Pretend you're eating the pork. Nobody will notice. Save your life. Keep teaching." And Eleazar answered with words the text preserves almost word for word. "At my age, it is not fitting to pretend. If the young men who admire me think that old Eleazar, at 90, switched to a foreign religion, my deception will ruin them. I would rather leave them a noble example of how to die." And he walked himself to the instrument of torture. They beat him to death while he prayed. And then came the family, a mother with no name in the text, and 7 sons. The second book of Maccabees, chapter 7, describes the scene with a precision that suffocates. Each one of the 7 was interrogated in front of the others. The first one had his tongue cut out, his scalp torn off, his hands and feet mutilated, and while he was still breathing, they put him to fry in a giant pan in front of his mother and his brothers. The same thing, one by one, with all 7. A single word would have saved them. A single chew. The mother spoke to each son in Hebrew, in her mother tongue, urging them not to give in. And in the end, when the 7th died, the mother was executed too. After that carnage, after the Maccabean rebellion, after the liberation of the temple in the year 164 before Christ and the festival now called Hanukkah, the pig stopped being an animal. It became a symbol. Whoever ate pork was Antiochus. Whoever did not eat pork was Eleazar. Whoever ate pork had sold his soul. Whoever died without eating it entered the memory of the people as a martyr. That is the real reason why, to this day, 2,194 years later, a secular Jew who keeps no other law of kashrut still refuses pork. It is not habit, it is memory. Every time a Jew turns down a piece of bacon, he is responding, without realizing it, to Antiochus. He is being Eleazar all over again. He is being the mother of the 7 sons all over again. If what you just discovered is rearranging something in your head, hit like right now, not for me. For Eleazar, for the mother who watched her 7 sons die, so that these names do not get lost in the algorithm, and drop me a comment with one single word, Eleazar. So I know who is really paying attention. Do you still think this is just a dietary issue? Wait, there is one massive piece missing, and here Islam enters the story, year 620 after Christ, Arabian Peninsula. A merchant named Muhammad begins receiving what he considers revelations. He lives surrounded by Jewish tribes, especially in Medina, where the Banu Kainuka, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Qurayza were powerful clans with synagogues and schools. He knows the biblical stories. He knows Syrian Christian merchants. And when the revelations come that will later become the Quran, the food laws are defined in 4 passages. Surah Al-Baqarah 2,173, Surah Al-Ma'idah 5,3, Surah Al-An'am 6,145, Surah An-Nahl 16,115. In all 4, the word is the same, kinzer, pig, and in all 4 it appears alongside blood, animals killed by strangulation, and meat sacrificed to other gods. Same category, same logic. The word the Quran uses to describe the pig is rijz, unclean, impure. The continuity with the Hebrew tameh is direct. It is not a literal translation, but it is the same theological concept crossing from Sinai to the desert of Arabia, 1,500 years later. Why does Muhammad reproduce, almost word for word, the prohibition of Leviticus? Because Islam was not born in a closed room. It was born in conversation, sometimes in confrontation, with the Judaism and Christianity of the 7th century. And when it came to defining the food border of the new movement, the decision was to inherit the line that the Jews had defended at the cost of their lives. The exception in the Quran is the same one that appears in the rabbinic halakha. If you are starving to death, you can eat the bare minimum, but not one bite more. Not for pleasure, not out of curiosity, not because your friends invited you. That is why, when a Muslim in Istanbul today sees a plate of Iberian ham and turns his face away, he is not following an Arab custom. He is following, without knowing it, the same line that began in Leviticus, passed through Eleazar, reached the desert of the Hijaz. One single current, 3 branches, one origin. But then, how can Christians eat pork? Here is the heart of the mystery. And the answer is not the one you hear from most pulpits. Almost all Christians, when someone asks them, give the same reply, because Jesus abolished the food laws in Mark 7:19, and because Peter had a vision in Acts 10 where God told him, "What I have cleansed, do not call unclean." End of story. We eat pork because Christ declared everything clean, except that when you go to the Greek text, that certainty falls apart. Mark 7:19. After explaining that what enters the mouth does not defile a man, but what comes out of the heart, comes a short phrase in Greek, katharizon pantata bromata, literally, cleansing all foods. And there is the problem. Modern translations often add in parentheses, thus Jesus declared all foods clean, but that thus is not in the Greek. It is the translator's interpretive decision. Commentators like R.T. France and Joel Marcus argue, with strong reasons, that yes, Mark as evangelist is affirming that Jesus released all foods. Other scholars respond that the entire context of the chapter was not about pork, it was about ritual hand-washing. The Pharisees were not accusing the disciples of eating bacon, which would have been absurd, but of eating kosher bread with hands not washed according to rabbinic tradition. The discussion was about human tradition, not about Leviticus, and the strongest proof that something does not fit the simple reading, Acts chapter 10, almost 10 years after the crucifixion, almost 10 years after Mark 7. Peter, the disciple who heard Jesus in person, is on a rooftop in Joppa, hungry, waiting for lunch to come up. And while he prays, he sees a sheet descending from the sky, full of every kind of animal, including no doubt pigs. And a voice says, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." What is Peter's answer? Watch this slowly. "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." Stop. Read it again. Peter, the one who walked with Jesus, the one who heard Mark 7 with his own ears, the one who watched Jesus teach about purity of heart. Almost 10 years after the resurrection, Peter still does not eat pork, and when God himself orders him to do it, Peter argues with God. He says no. 3 times he says no. Does that sound to you like an apostle who heard Jesus abolish the food laws? If the traditional reading were that simple, Peter would have had bacon for breakfast the day after the loaves and fishes. He did not. 10 years. 10 years, it was still unthinkable. So what really happened? What happened in Acts 10 was not originally about food. It was about people. Watch how Peter himself interprets the vision when he reaches the house of the centurion Cornelius. He says, in his own words, "You know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to associate with or to visit a foreigner. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Any man, not any pig, any man." The vision was never, at its core, dietary permission. It was permission to enter the houses of Gentiles, to sit at the table with Romans, Syrians, Greeks, to preach the gospel beyond the ethnic fence of Israel. The sheet full of animals was a visual metaphor. The message was theological, social, missionary, and yet in the following 30 years, something changed. Paul, the converted Pharisee Jew, writes to the Romans and to the Corinthians with a food freedom that surprises his Jewish readers. I know and trust in the Lord Jesus. He says in Romans 14:14 that nothing is unclean in itself. But pay attention to the detail, because here is the trap. Paul does not say Leviticus was wrong. He says that for those who are in Christ, the category tamei lost its power to separate the people of God. Not because God changed his mind, but because in his theology, the cross broke the boundary that the food law set between Jews and Gentiles. What was separating was the pig and other things, but mostly the pig. When Paul writes that in Christ there is no Jew or Greek, he is not just talking about ethnic identity, he is talking about table. He is saying that now Jews and Gentiles can eat together, and for them to be able to eat together, the rules that separated the tables had to be relativized. Does that mean that the pig, for Paul, is now clean? Yes, but with a condition that most modern Christians have forgotten. The freedom to eat pork, according to Paul, is bound to love. If there is a weak brother, someone coming from Judaism who still cannot see pork as neutral, then you, the strong Christian, do not eat pork in front of him. If because of food your brother is grieved, Paul writes in the same letter, you are no longer walking in love. That is to say, Paul does not say eat pork because you are free. He says you are free, but that freedom is for giving away in love. If it makes someone stumble, you do not eat. If it does not, you are free. Christian freedom, in regard to pork, is not gastronomic individualism. It is pastoral responsibility. And here is the bitter irony. Modern Christianity, for the most part, lost that nuance entirely. We eat pork without thinking. We serve ham at the wedding dinner in the parish hall, and at the same time, we look at Muslims and Jews with a mix of incomprehension and slight cultural mockery, as if they were people trapped in ancient rules that we, the enlightened, have already gotten past. That is exactly the opposite of what Paul taught. Paul called us to a freedom that moves downward, not upward, a freedom that lowers itself so as not to wound the weak brother. The first Christian council in history, the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15, decided that converted Gentiles did not need to keep the whole Jewish law, but it asked them to abstain, among other things, from meat sacrificed to idols and from blood. Why? So as not to scandalize the Jews in the synagogues where the gospel was being preached. It was a pastoral concession, a freedom sacrificed for love. Today, when a Christian has dinner with a Muslim and serves him pork without warning, when a believer brings cured ham to an event without thinking about the Jew who is going to walk in, when a church organizes a barbecue without considering who it leaves out, that Christian is not exercising freedom. He is being the exact opposite of the Council of Jerusalem. He is being, without realizing it, a little bit like Antiochus. And we are not done yet. Because thinking that this story ended in the 1st century is to understand absolutely nothing. Spain, year 1492. The Catholic monarchs signed the expulsion of the Jews. Those who stay are baptized, and the Inquisition begins to hunt those who pretend. Do you know what one of the most used tests for identifying a suspicious convert was? Food. If a family said it was Christian but rejected pork, it was denounced, brought before the inquisitorial tribunal, sometimes burned at the stake, the pig, again, as an instrument of persecution, again like Antiochus, only now with a cross hanging on the wall of the courtroom. There were families that for generations pretended to eat pork in public and refused it in private. Those who were caught were called in contempt by a word that medieval Spanish had already attested since the 10th century, marrano, whose etymology, according to most lexicographers, comes from the popular term for pig. To be a Marrano in the medieval insult was to be a hidden Jew who supposedly looked like the animal he was rejecting. Are you starting to see the pattern? Every time in history a dominant power wanted to humiliate, identify, or exterminate Jews or Muslims, the pig appeared. In the occupied Poland of 1939, there are documented testimonies in the memorial books of Radom of Nazi soldiers who took the Hebrew teacher Chaim David Wax and tried to force him to swallow pork in a work pit before killing him. In Catholic Spain, the pig was the detector. In the Syrian Antioch of the year 167 before Christ, the pig was the weapon. 3,000 years. The same animal, the same border, the same pain. And we, in the 21st century, eat bacon without thinking. When a Muslim today refuses pork, he is not following an Arab custom. He is honoring, without knowing it, a line that runs through Abraham. When a Jew today refuses pork, he is responding to Antiochus, to Torquemada, to the ghetto of Radom, to Eleazar, to his mother, to his 7 tortured brothers. When a Christian today eats pork, he is exercising a freedom that Paul won, but that freedom is only legitimate if it is exercised with awareness of what it cost. Christian freedom is not ignorance, it is informed freedom. It is knowing why you are free, and knowing that your freedom was bought on a cross that was also, in a certain sense, a table. Because if you think about it, do you know what the final image of the entire Bible is? It is not an altar, it is not a temple, it is not an army, it is a dinner. The wedding supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19:9. A table where Jews and Gentiles will sit together, martyrs of every century, rabbis who died before they would touch the pig, Christians who ate pork in freedom, peoples whom the Lamb will call his own by grace, all at the same table. And at that final table, what will be served? The text does not say, but it says something better. Revelation 21:27. Nothing unclean shall ever enter it. Tameh in Hebrew, the same word from Leviticus 11, the word that separated Israel from the Philistines, the Jews from the Gentiles, the Muslims from the polytheists. That word will finally disappear. Not because the rules will have changed, but because there will no longer be anything that needs to be separated. What contaminates will be cast out. What enters will be only what has already been cleansed by the Lamb. That is what the pig was always pointing toward. Forward, toward that dinner, toward that moment when separation will no longer be necessary because holiness will cover everything. Eleazar did not die for a piece of meat. He died for a table that had not yet arrived. The mother of the 7 sons did not bury her sons for a dietary rule. She buried them for a table that is being prepared. And the Muslims who refuse pork today, the Jews who separate meat from dairy, the Christians who eat bacon with awareness or without awareness, are all, without realizing it, sitting in the antechamber of the same table. The dinner is already being prepared, and the question is not what you are going to eat. The question is, who invited you?